For many of us, it's a worry that starts as soon as we hit adulthood. How long will that lovely bouffant of hair stay around? There's plenty of theories and hearsay about how your everyday lifestyle can affect hair growth and lead to balding. Overwashing, stress, styling, too much testosterone, and even too much sex are suggested culprits, to name but a few.
So, what can we really do or avoid doing to try and keep hold of our luscious locks? I'm Stu, this is Debunked, and we're here to sort the truths from the myths and the facts from the misconceptions.
Worryingly, hair loss can start as early as your teens, with 20% of men suffering from some form of balding by the age of 20. And then it just gets worse from there, because 30% of men will experience hair loss by 30 years old, 40% by 40, and half will see their follicles fall by age 50.
You don't have to be a genius to see the pattern here. So, what's going on? Well, we tend to lose our head hair in one of three ways on different areas of the scalp.
It recedes, we develop a bald patch, or it thins out. The factors that decide the type of hair loss we experience are believed to be genetic. For example, studies have shown that twins will lose their hair at the same age over the same period of time and in the same pattern.
Okay, so now I've set the scene, let's drill down into some science and first take a look at the good old receding hairline.
This is termed bitemporal recession and is characterized by the triangle of hair that we slowly lose over each temple, starting at the anterior hairline and moving backwards, creating the familiar M shape we associate with receded hair. This can precede any other form of hair loss by many years. And in fact, this happens to some degree in most boys as they hit puberty, though the hair loss is usually quite mild.
So if you're in your teens and have begun to notice your hairline retreating, don't panic. This is a perfectly natural phase of development, and your hair is unlikely to continue receding with any great urgency.
In fact, less than 5% of men retain their straight anterior hairline that they have in boyhood.
So don't feel too bad if you're among the 95%.
The next form of hair loss is the development of a bald patch on the crown of the head that spreads out in all directions, creating a circular baldness. In some cases, an area at the bottom of the circle can remain, creating a sort of hoof shape.
What's interesting about these two forms of hair loss is that the hair we lose seems pre-programmed to behave in this way.
Experiments have shown that when hairs next to an increasingly balding area are transplanted to another location on the body, the hair follicles continue to shrink and fall out on schedule, as though they were still on the head. The third common form of hair loss is thinning, which occurs at the top of the head and is the most typical form among women, affecting over 75% of the female population and 85% of men as they age. With this kind, you could lose up to 50% of your overall head hair before you even noticed any balding. For women, they may realise that their ponytail, for example, is less full, whereas for men, it's harder to remain camouflaged, as we tend to have shorter hair. So an actual bald patch may be the first thing we notice.
To find out why we lose our hair, it's important to first understand the natural cycle of hair growth and to know when it's perfectly normal for hairs to fall out and when it's not.
Hair is made up of two main parts, the hair follicle and the hair shaft. The follicle includes the dermal papilla, which supplies blood nutrients, and the bulb, where cells divide to grow new hair. The hair shaft is what is made from these cells and is pushed out of the follicle, resulting in the new hair growth we see appearing through our scalp.
Now we know what we're looking at, here's the three phases of each hair's life cycle.
1. The growth phase. This is called anagen. The longer your hair follicles continue in this phase, the more hair it will produce and the longer it will grow. This tends to last 2 to 6 years, which is why we can end up with such long hair. 2. The regression phase. Lasting up to 2 weeks, this is a transitional stage called catagen, where the hair detaches from the dermal papilla and blood supply and growth comes to an end. The follicle shrinks and a bulb of keratin is formed, acting as a root to keep the hair in the scalp. This is known as a club hair. 3. The resting phase, called telogen. At this stage, the follicle lies dormant for around 3 months, basically doing nothing, with your hair not growing. There is actually a preceding subphase to this referred to as exogen. This is where the hair actually falls out. And then the cycle starts again. Your hairs will be at different points in the cycle at different times. so that you tend to have a full head of hair at any one time. During this cycle, however, the average adult will lose roughly 100 hairs per day, but with around 100,000 hairs on your head, you're unlikely to notice losing 0.1% of them, unless your hair's long enough to clog up the drain.
When the number of hairs that fall out starts to significantly increase, you are likely to be suffering from androgenetic alopecia, which is more commonly known as pattern hair loss or pattern baldness.
This occurs when the hair follicles slowly shrink. The growth phase reduces and the resting phase gets longer. The now smaller hair follicle produces a thinner hair, and as the follicle continues to get smaller with each new cycle, it becomes less and less well anchored to the scalp, making it easier to fall out. Over time, a reduced growing phase means the hair cannot grow as long, and eventually, the growth phase becomes so short that the hair doesn't even have a chance to peek through the surface of the skin.
Which is a roundabout way of saying you're going bald. So, what causes the follicle to start shrinking?
Well, this brings us on to what clinical professor Neil Sadek claims is one of the most common misconceptions, namely that having lots of sex and overflowing with testosterone can cause baldness. This, you'll be glad to hear, is untrue. But you can see why this myth gained traction, because it is instead a sensitivity to testosterone, where it is converted into a hormone called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, which actually causes the follicular downsizing. Although you shouldn't be too resentful of DHT, as this hormone helps form your male characteristics like a deep voice and increased muscle mass. Ironically, it's actually essential for growing body hair and facial hair, yet detrimental to head hair. But hey, a lot of guys have managed to rock this look.
The expendable. It's like a commercial for hair loss when you see the full lineup.
Nevertheless, why are some of us converting more testosterone into DHT and so balding earlier than others?
One culprit is an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase, found in the sebaceous glands under your scalp. It is here that 5-AR converts testosterone into the dreaded DHT. As levels of 5-AR increase, more and more of your testosterone will be converted into DHT. This in turn stimulates more production of the skin's natural lubricant, sebum, and more hair loss will occur.
Now, if you're not already bald, then how would you possibly know if you have any of these worryingly high levels?
This is where family heritage comes into play, because the best way to identify if your DHT levels are likely to be high is to look back at your family history, i.e. if your dad's bald, you're likely to have higher levels of these substances too, and so be in the same situation as him.
On the other hand, your father can't take all the blame, as you may also be able to point the finger at your mother.
One of the largest studies on male hair loss was conducted by the University of Edinburgh in 2017. It looked at 52,000 men and identified 287 different genetic signals that link to hair loss. Their findings suggested that the long-standing theory that men inherit hair loss from their mother's side, often thought to be from her father, does genuinely hold some weight. In the study, researchers identified that while most of the genetic signals were scattered across the genome, 40 of them were linked directly with the X chromosome, which we inherit from our mothers. On the plus side, if your mum's father had a full head of hair through to a ripe old age, then you might be lucky. But if he was as bald as an egg, then I'm afraid you may be heading the same way. It is common though for these traits to skip a generation, so there's still hope yet.
Either way, we can't do a great deal about any of this, as it's all just genetics, unless you go down the route of using anti-DHT medication. However, it's not a great idea to mess with your DHT levels, as this is the sex hormone that essentially makes you male. So blocking or reducing the production of this before you have finished developing as an adult is seriously not recommended.
Heritage and medication aside, if you know that your hair tends to get oily or greasy quickly, you most likely have a higher production of sebum. So the best thing you can do is try and manage the amount on your scalp by washing your hair regularly. Otherwise, this can lead to issues like blocked pores that can consequently be detrimental to hair growth. Leading trichologist or hair doctor Annabelle Kingsley, as well as specialists at the UK's leading hair loss clinic, recommend washing your hair daily and claim that the long-standing myth that overwashing strips your hair of its natural oils is just that, a myth. Your scalp is skin, just like your face, and it's important to keep it clean each day. If you're finding that washing your hair regularly causes your scalp to be dry, then switch to a more sensitive shampoo.
Aside from DHT, there are other factors at play when it comes to hair loss.
A survey in 2016 found that 22% of men were concerned that frequent use of their hairstyling products would cause them to go bald. The theory goes that caking your hair in a chemical-based gloop like gel or pomade will block your hair follicles and inhibit growth.
So, is there any evidence to suggest that these lifestyle choices are actually causing harm?
Well, the hair itself is not a living material. The only living part of the hair is made up inside the follicle. Once it sprouts out, it's essentially dead. And so long as you only apply your preferred styling gloop to the hair, not the scalp, then all you are doing is coating the strands and then washing it off at the end of the day. It is highly recommended, however, to avoid applying or massaging any styling products to the scalp itself, as this can irritate and inflame the skin, causing itching and flaking, and could be detrimental to hair growth. But even in a fairly extreme example, trichologist Vanessa Bailey says that they won't cause you long-term damage.
I once came across a patient who did ruin their hair with excessive use of hair gel. The product was applied in excess to the hair every day without the hair being shampooed for a period of 3 weeks. However, this was only cosmetic damage, of course, and didn't mean he became more susceptible to baldness. Once the damaged ends were removed, a healthy head of hair remained.
On the other hand, if you do have a sensitive scalp, it's worth staying away from styling products that contain a high level of alcohol, as this will just dry and irritate your scalp. A water-based product is often considered the best option, and it will be easier to rinse out without the need for shampoo.
Yet our worries don't stop there.
With a now freshly washed sopping wet head, the next concern is whether towel drying will cause our hair to fall out. Interestingly, it does, but not in the way you may think.
Our hairs are protected by cuticles. Not these, but these.
You see, each hair strand is essentially made up of fibres, and these are covered by a protective outer layer known as cuticles. When our hair is wet, the strand swells, making the cuticles open. Then, when it is dry, the cuticles close back down. If you rub a towel vigorously across your wet hair when the cuticles are open, the protective layer is vulnerable to friction damage and will eventually be eroded away, exposing the fibres. Without the protective outer layer, these fibres are no longer held together and will then fray and break away. This then appears to us that our hair is falling out. But the damage is only being done to the actual hair shaft, not the follicle itself, so towel drying will not lead to permanent hair loss. If, like most guys, you do dry your hair like this, then it is highly recommended to use a conditioner, as this is designed to protect the cuticles and close them back down.
And interestingly, letting your hair dry naturally isn't the next best option.
A study in 2011 experimented with different hair drying methods and observed the damage they caused. The results showed that the best approach was to blow dry your hair in a continuous motion, with a hairdryer held 15 centimeters, roughly 6 inches, away from the hair. It also found that the hair cuticles suffered more damage as the temperature increased, so a medium to low temperature setting was preferable.
Right, so now that we have a clean and dry healthy head of hair, what other factors are out there trying to rob us of our prized locks?
A poll we recently conducted with our audience showed that 33% of people have real concerns about how stress can cause hair loss.
The good news for the 33% is that this doesn't cause androgenetic alopecia or pattern baldness, the common hair loss we've been talking about.
But there is an autoimmune disease known as alopecia areata, which causes you to lose hair in unpredictable circular patches. This form of hair loss has traditionally been considered a stress-induced disorder. However, there is very little scientific evidence to support this theory. Severe stress may be a trigger in a small number of cases, but there are other factors like hormones, viruses, allergies, and toxins that all play a part, and it's believed it is when several factors combine that prompt the development of alopecia areata. The good news is that depending on the extent of the hair loss, 4 out of 5 people will recover fully within a year.
Now, I don't want to stress anyone out, for obvious reasons, but there is another form of hair loss that you may be more susceptible to, known as telogen effluvium. This is a reactive type of hair loss and can be induced by stress.
With all your hairs happily going about their individual life cycles, each with their own schedule, stress or trauma can disrupt this cycle and shock a large percentage of them into the resting phase, no matter what stage they were at. By resetting or resynchronizing these hairs back to this phase, it means that the hairs won't actually fall out for another 3 months once they reach the exogen phase. And when they do, it will give the appearance of thinning. Dermatologist Dr. Lauren Plock explains the theory behind why our body reacts to stress in this way.
When our body experiences stress, it essentially goes into survival mode and diverts resources away from functions that are non-essential for life, such as hair growth.
On the positive side, this form of hair loss is rarely permanent. It will normally grow back and return to its regular life cycle within 3 to 5 months of the initial shedding. So, now that we have a decent understanding of most of the environmental and genetic factors that do and don't cause hair loss, what can we do when our hair is genuinely on its way out?
Well, there is a $4 billion hair regrowth industry worldwide, so surely some of it must work. Luckily, a discovery in 2018 by Dr. Nathan Hawkshaw may have finally got to the root of the problem. During his investigations, he found a useful side effect of a drug called cyclosporine A. Primarily used for organ transplants to stop the patient's body rejecting the new organ, this drug also enhanced hair growth. Hawkshaw identified that it was affecting a protein called SFRP1 in particular, which promotes follicle growth. With further exploration, he discovered a pre-existing osteoporosis drug that targeted this protein, and so he applied it to scalp samples.
We usually do experiments for over a week. We put the hair follicles in a dish and this drug enhanced hair shaft elongation within 2 days. But it also kept the hairs healthier. When you look at them, they're larger, thicker hair follicles. So it's quite promising.
Though for many, this discovery feels like yet another fruitless promise, as scientists have been announcing that the cure for baldness is only around the corner for years. Spencer Cobreen, author and founder of the American Hair Loss Association, is continually skeptical, having heard these claims for the past 20 years.
When I wrote my book in 1998, they had just found the hair loss gene. There was talk of hair clones. We were like, this is it. We're going to cure this in 5 years.
More than 2 decades later, and we're in the same position. Alternatively, the upside of having only specific areas of the head that are prone to the common types of balding is that there are areas, namely the back and sides of the head, that do not go bald, meaning procedures like transplants are now possible and easier than ever with modern scientific advances. Currently, you can have 4,500 grafts in a single session, which is close to the amount you would need to cover the top portion of a completely bald head. So, for some, going bald is now optional, although it doesn't come cheap. A hair transplant can cost anywhere up to $40,000, depending on the level of hair loss. For some, the next best option is a pharmaceutical drug called finasteride, better known by its brand name, Propecia. Across the whole of our research for this video, this is the treatment that seems to come up trumps, literally. US President Trump puts his, albeit strange, but full head of hair down to the regular use of Propecia.
Everybody else seems to like it.
In fact, the American Hair Loss Association claims that it stops the progression of hair loss in 86% of men.
Except again, this is a DHT reducing treatment, so should only be used after a certain age.
Remember, DHT is a sex hormone, and there are potential negative sexual side effects of taking finasteride. So consult a doctor when going down this path. But drugs like these only stop hair from falling out anyway. They are not considered to promote regrowth. Propecia still isn't exactly an affordable option for most, with 6 months supply of tablets costing around $360. If you do go down this route, hair transplant surgeon Dr. Raghu Reddy offers a useful life hack.
Propecia lasts for about 16 hours, so even if you take it every other day, it should still work.
However, if medication like this is too costly, what about over-the-counter hair boosting shampoos, like the ones that contain caffeine?
German engineering for your hair. Shampoo is too small a word for it. Alpazin provides caffeine to your hair, so it can actually help to reduce hair loss.
Well, the UK Advertising Standards Authority have actually banned this brand from advertising that their products can reduce hair loss, as there is not enough evidence that it has any effect. And according to trichologist Annabelle Kingsley,
despite some of the claims, a shampoo or conditioner won't be able to stop or slow hair loss, nor help with the receding hairline or thicken hair that's becoming thinner.
So if your hair is already on its way out, and unless you want to invest some serious dollar into keeping it, then Cobreen's advice may be more suitable.
Cut your hair as short as you can. If you can own it, you can beat baldness.
As to why we go bald, no real genetic advantage has ever been identified. There are, however, theories that in the age of the hunter-gatherers, when life expectancies were significantly lower and so a bald head rarer, it became associated with strength, wisdom and social maturity, making them the natural choice for leader in a group, although there isn't really any science to back this up.
If you are lucky enough to have a full head of hair and are keen on keeping it that way, there are a few simple habits that you should adopt into your everyday lifestyle.
Wash your hair daily with a sensitive shampoo. If you have dry hair, then wash it every other day, and make sure you gently massage the shampoo into your scalp, as its primary purpose is to clean the scalp of any sebum buildup. Gently dry your hair, ideally with a hairdryer following these guides. Use a water-based styling product and rinse it out at the end of each day. Keep on top of your mental health so that you can deal with stress. Meditation techniques like mindfulness can go a long way to helping you with the stresses of the everyday, and it only takes a few minutes. And finally, eat a healthy diet. Deficiencies in iron, vitamin D and B vitamins have been closely linked to hair loss. Plus, biotin-rich foods like nuts, seeds, sweet potatoes or tomatoes help condition the scalp to provide a healthy environment for the hair follicles. It's also worth making sure you eat enough protein, as the keratin hair is made from is actually a form of hard protein. As leading trichologist Annabelle Kingsley puts it,
if you aren't eating correctly, no matter what products you use on your hair, it simply won't grow to its best ability.
Thank you for watching. Check out the video that's on screen now, and if you haven't subscribed, then please click on the button below. We have a Patreon page, and if you'd like to support us, click on the button and check out our rewards. We want to make more videos, and it's your support that helps make this possible. We hope to see you next time.